now to discuss that game and what we hope are many games for BYU football is former BYU quarterback, current BYU radio analyst Riley Nelson on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Riley, BYU and Navy, how you feeling about it to kick off this wild, strange 2020 COVID-19 season?
Yeah, baby. Brother Ken Niumatalolo coming through. I had a good feeling about that guy when I saw him in the Meet the Mormons movie. So now, even all that stuff that they talked about and being a stake president and all that out there, what really matters is the fact that he was able to make this game happen for all of us.
Yes, and I love the matchup. Obviously, it's two coaches who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, two coaches that are Polynesian. And Ken Niumatalolo was in the running, for Kalani's, ended up staying at Navy where he's been uber successful. So I like the matchup. It's certainly unique with the run game. I want to talk about that in a second. But I said it earlier. I think this could be the most viewed BYU football game of all time. This is Labor Day. This is ESPN. This is football. I think this is going to pull in millions of viewers.
No question. I mean, look at some of these, what the these PGA golf events are pulling in, the numbers that UFC's pulling in when baseball had their first games. I mean, baseball's first game to kick off the season was the most watched regular season game since like the early 2000s. It had been 15 plus years. So I think you're right. The stars are aligning for incredible exposure on this singular game.
Riley Nelson on BYU Sports Nation. Okay, the BYU football training camp is underway. Now they know they're preparing for Navy. What have you gathered from the team in terms of the mentality and the attitude that they had to bring into camp, not really knowing if they were going to have a season, and now they know that they have a game? But what mentality do they have right now?
Yeah, well, in the minor interactions that I've had over the summer with a couple of guys and some people surrounding the program is the majority. I mean, you've got guys coming back for their senior year like Bushman and Kairos Tonga and some of those guys who are going to be vital to the success of this team. Don't get me wrong. But when you look at it as far as number of players, the core and the number of players would be going into their, sophomore, junior, even some redshirt freshmen that are kind of expected to contribute. So the core was still young. So guys were coming in like, look, if the season, they were all pretty confident they were going to play some games, whether that dwindled all the way down to 4 or 5 or 6, or if they can get back up to 7, 8, 9, 10 or something in that. But the attitude was always, we're going to take this opportunity to get better as football players and to build our chemistry to get better as a team, because the majority of us are still going to be here after this season when hopefully things get back to normal, or at least some new normal where we're playing somewhere close to a 12-game schedule.
It's exciting to have this first game now because every day we sit here, Riley, and we talk about, well, I don't know if we're going to have a season. And it's just not fun to talk about that, right? But here we are now, and we can focus on a matchup. So BYU is going to play some football, right? And they're going to play Navy, and they're going to try and win this game. You competed in several games against Air Force. Give us an idea of what it's like to play a military academy. You respect them for what they do on and off the field, yet you're trying to go win that game. So this is going to be a historical situation, not only because of 2020, but playing Navy, and this matchup's going to be a fun one.
The Navy's a tremendous program. I'd say in recent history, Navy is on the same level that Air Force was, which I think was like the early to mid 90s when they were consistently top 20. Air Force had a really good thing going for them. Well, that's what Navy's taken that place as far as just being a quality football program in all three phases, not just a gimmick that runs the old style offenses that are run dominant. As far as playing them, it's extremely difficult. As a defense, obviously, they're diving at your knees and they're blowing off the ball, and you've got the option, and they're incredibly good and well practiced at their ball fakes and play actions and all of those things. And then as an offense, you're like, all right, well, we're probably going to get 3 possessions in the first half and maybe 3 or 4 if we're lucky in the second half. And so we got to come up with, 24 to 28 points in those possessions, which means we have to score on more than half of them, score touchdowns on more than half of them. So it gets a lot of pressure on there. But that said, if you're disciplined and you play with great effort, you can neutralize that offensive attack that they have. And then normally you should, because of the recruiting limitations on armed forces programs, you should have a talent advantage on offense versus defense. So that's the game plan for overcoming the challenge that they pose.
Riley, we now know that BYU is planning on opening the season against one of these Armed Forces Academy, but we're not positive because we haven't heard from the coaches on who the starting quarterback is going to be. Jerem and I are a consensus that it's going to be Zach Wilson. But is there any reason it wouldn't be Zach Wilson as the starting quarterback against Navy?
You bet. COVID-19. Like, what happens if he tests? No, but that's the reality. He tests positive, has to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, and he's got to step up. Now, the tough thing about that is, what do you do the fact that he's been sharing a quarterback room with all your other quarterbacks in the program?
Yes.
I don't want to get down that rat hole and that road, but no, that's the only scenario, barring an injury in fall camp, right? Like something happens in team where maybe his hand comes down on a helmet and he breaks a thumb or pulls a hamstring in conditioning or some fluky injury like that. I definitely think that Zach's the guy to start the season and the guy that they're going to give the first chance to prove to the first opportunity to win the job and solidify himself.
Certainly BYU is capable at that position. Then you look at the running backs. Devontae Henry Cole went to Utah State. That seemed like it was a bummer. Kalani Sitake, somewhat defensive yesterday when asked about it, saying we're going to be fine. How do you feel about the running backs? And with the experienced offensive line BYU comes back, should BYU be pretty good at that position?
If I'm Lopini Katoa, like based off what he did his freshman year and last year as his sophomore year, and granted he's been banged up a little bit, but he's probably, at least in recent memory, one of the most underappreciated or passed over. Like we all are just, everyone got in such a fervor that, oh, we got DHC or, oh, we got Tyson Williams. And trust me, they're good players and good running backs, but Lopini Katoa has been extremely productive, both with the ball under his arm and catching it out of the backfield. And if I'm him, this is my opportunity to be a feature back. I'm doing everything I can to put myself in a position to where I can stay healthy over the whole season and be featured. And if we can get a feature back in Lopini Katoa, I think Kalani's comments were right that we have a deep enough room and there's enough talent in that at that running back position that two other guys, whether it's Jackson McChesney or the newer guys that he mentioned, the redshirt freshmen and some of those guys coming up to provide change of pace, I do think they're fine. I don't think that Devontae Henry Cole transferring up to Utah State was a fatal blow to the running back room at all. I think it might affect its production minimally, but not wholesale. And I'm excited for what, again, like I said, I think Lopini's going to be motivated to kind of earn the respect that he finally deserves.
We assume BYU is still going to play Utah State. Who knows if the date changes based on the Mountain West announcement, but DHC knows the BYU offensive plays, right? What does BYU have to do when they play Utah State since DHC can relay that information?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, though, because I was in a similar situation. Granted, I had the mission, and it was a new coaching staff, but I dealt with that. We had transfers where we would play their old school. And the defensive coordinators at the college level, I'm not going to – and look, it's probably different for Coach Tuiaki and the defensive staff, but I'll just say it. Their egos are such that I don't know that they're going to take scheme advice from a running back. If you know. So
Fair enough.
They would ask him, one or two things, but they're confident in their own abilities to scheme from what they can see on tape. That I don't think that's going to put it at too much of an advantage.
That's hilarious.
Riley Nelson with us on BYU Sports Nation. His ego is always in check. Riley, what's the deepest position group on the BYU football team right now?
Probably offensive line or tight end, I'd say. I think, when you have an anchor like Kairos Tonga and a lot of returners, the defensive line. Man, I hadn't thought about this question before you asked me, so I'm rambling a little bit. But then I think about the linebackers and all the production we got from such young players and with all of them returning. But I think the strength of the team last year was definitely offensive line, especially they had some injuries and they had other guys step up and do it, and the majority of those guys are returning. So I'd say them too. But then also when I look at the defensive front seven, both the defensive line and linebackers, the difference in the linebackers is while there was young and there was some production, there's not like that anchor player that you can point to like on the defensive line. But and by the way, I'm so happy to say that the strength is in the trenches, because while we do need someone who can stretch the field and we maybe need some production, on the outside from a receiver standpoint and all of that, if you are solid up front on offense and defense, then it makes the jobs for those guys on the back end who are where you're maybe searching for a playmaker far more easy.
Pro Football Focus has been screaming at us the whole offseason that Brady Christensen's one of the best left tackles in the country. James Empey is one of the best centers. What's your evaluation of those two guys and the O-line as a whole?
I played with a couple of guys that had a lot of offseason fervor. Matt Reynolds was one, and anyway, Matt's the first that comes to mind, and he had a tremendous career and was a tremendous player, and he was everything that he's billed to be. One of the things that I saw Matt struggle with, and Matt handled this extremely well, obviously coming from the pedigree that he did with his dad being a longtime BYU coach and having a couple brothers who had gone to the NFL, Matt kind of knew how to handle the expectations. My evaluation is that those guys are great players. And then my take on that, or my advice would be, ignore all of that stuff. The best thing you can do for your draft stock, the best thing you can do for your opportunities to play beyond BYU are to absolutely prepare to the best you can in this offseason and go out and dominate this fall. And so that's fully what I'm expecting from Empey and Christensen and the rest of the offensive line.
Riley, we'll finish with one more scheduling question, because that is the hot topic of the day and of the last few months for BYU. We don't know what's going to happen, but what would you like to see happen with the remaining opening dates for BYU football?
With the recent announcements from the American Conference and the Mountain West Conference allowing those non-conference games and multiple non-conference games, I expect to add, even if we can get one more from the American and one more from Mountain West, or because there's already, we have more Mountain West already on the schedule, maybe add 2 more American and another Mountain West, and we get to, as good a slate as we could have hoped for, given how bleak things were looking a month ago when all the P5s were going conference only. I think we have pretty good relationships with those. Well, things are a little bit tenuous in the Mountain West, obviously. I think that's been well documented just from having left that conference. But I think we've had good games with the American. Granted, we're not going to start any fights like we did in the bowl against Memphis anymore, right? As long as we can agree not to do that anymore. But man, if we could pick up a Memphis or a Cincinnati or something like that, in addition to having picked up Navy, that's what I'm looking for and hoping for, is for a game or two to come from an additional game or two to come from either of those conferences.
Riley, great to catch up with you, man. It's such an exciting time. And so we're glad we got to celebrate this moment with you.
What better news for Wednesday, fellas? I'm pumped. Let's go.
Let's go.
Baby.
Thanks, Riley. Riley Nelson on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, you know why, we show how.